The champagne in my glass had long gone flat by the time Sylvia stood up at the head table. A slow, scraping hush fell over the reception hall as she lifted her crystal flute, her sequined dress catching the light like 1,000 tiny knives. I should have known then. I should have known from the glint in her eye. Too sharp. Too eager. "Ladies and gentlemen," she purred, her voice syrupy sweet. "What a special day it is. For my son Ethan, and his charming bride." A ripple of polite laughter stirred the crowd. I tightened my grip around the stem of my glass, the cold biting into my skin. Ethan sat beside me, his arm casually draped across the back of my chair, his smile frozen at the edges. Sylvia continued, each word a thread pulling at the seams of my carefully woven joy. "You know," she said, turning to the room with mock conspiratorial warmth, "when Ethan first introduced us to Emily, I thought, how quaint. A girl from such a humble background, joining our family. It's like something out of a Hallmark movie, isn't it?" The laughter this time was sharper, brittle and cutting. I could feel my face heating, the blood roaring in my ears. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught my mother dabbing discreetly at her eyes with a napkin. Whether from pride or shame, I wasn't sure anymore. Sylvia wasn't finished. And despite, well, everything. She paused dramatically, letting the room lean in. "Emily has done remarkably well. It's not easy to step up into our world. Takes a certain tenacity." She smiled like a cat licking cream from its whiskers. "I mean, anyone willing to marry Ethan must be determined, right?" This time the laughter was full and cruel. The words hit harder than champagne ever could. Determined, as if I had clawed my way up from the dirt, desperate to snag a rich husband. As if I hadn't loved Ethan with the naive, aching purity of someone who thought love could silence every doubt. My wedding ring, delicate, platinum, and just a little too loose, seemed to grow heavier with each passing second. I twisted it around my finger, the metal cold and unwelcoming. Ethan chuckled awkwardly beside me, offering no defense, no protest. Just a nervous hand on my bare shoulder, patting me like one might a trembling pet. I shrank inward, the satin of my dress whispering against my skin like a rebuke. Sylvia raised her glass higher. "To new beginnings," she crowed. The hall echoed, with the clinking of glasses, hollow and dissonant. I couldn't move. Couldn't speak. I smiled, or something like it, and let the world blur at the edges. When the toasts ended, people swarmed around Ethan with congratulations, their eyes slipping past me like I was part of the wallpaper. I stood there beneath the chandeliers, the golden light spilling over me like molten shame. I watched him, laughing and clapping his college buddies on the back, my husband, my rescuer, my betrayer. The dance floor filled. The cake was cut. The first dances were announced, but I was somewhere else entirely. Adrift in a hollow space inside myself where the fairy tale had shattered, each glittering shard slicing at the corners of my dreams. I glanced down at my hand again. The ring, winked mockingly under the chandeliers. A perfect circle. A trap. My mother found me eventually, her face pinched with worry, but I couldn't bear her touch. Couldn't bear her whispered, "Sweetheart, don't let her ruin this for you. It wasn't just Sylvia. It was Ethan. It was me." I slipped away, past the laughing guests, the flashing cameras, the shrieking children sliding on the dance floor. Out, into the crisp night air, where the stars sprawled indifferently across the sky. I stood alone on the stone steps of the reception hall, my veil fluttering in the cold breeze like a ghost trying to escape. Inside, I heard the thrum of the bass, the hum of laughter and clinking glasses, the life I was supposed to step into. Instead, I stared down at the ring on my finger, that tiny, gleaming circle of promises and lies, and felt a cold certainty settle in my bones. I had married into a family that would never see me as enough. I had married a man who wouldn't protect me, had walked into this prison with my eyes wide shut. And now, I wasn't sure if there was any way out. If I had to name the exact moment I started slipping away from myself, it would be the night I met Ethan. It was raining, the kind of cold spring rain that soaked through your jacket no matter how tightly you pulled it around you. I was working 2 jobs back then. Mornings in a cramped coffee shop, evenings manning the register at a half-dead bookstore that smelled of mildew and forgotten dreams. That night, Ethan came in just before closing, his umbrella dripping trails of water across the old carpet, his navy coat perfectly tailored, his smile disarming. He bought a first edition Hemingway, paid in cash, and stayed long enough to ask my name. I told him, shyly, guarded, but there was a warmth about him that made me forget how hard my life had been lately. Made me forget that just 2 months earlier, I'd stood over my father's grave clutching a wilting bouquet and wondering how grief could make the world so colorless. Ethan's world was not colorless. It was vivid and loud and golden. He lived in a place where problems were interesting challenges, not survival battles, where invitations arrived in heavy cream envelopes, not paper bills stamped final notice. Our first date was at a restaurant, where the napkins were pressed so neatly they looked ironed, and the chandeliers dripped with crystals instead of dust. He held the door open. He laughed easily. He told me I was different, special. No one had called me special in years. Looking back, maybe it wasn't Ethan himself I fell in love with. Maybe it was the feeling of being seen again, after so long being invisible. The first time he kissed me under the flickering glow of a dying streetlight, I remember thinking, maybe everything will be okay now. Maybe I don't have to fight so hard anymore. Maybe. It didn't take long for the shadows to creep in. Sylvia, Ethan's mother, was polite at first, polished, her smiles carefully measured, her compliments wrapped in barbed wire. "You're so ambitious," she said once at a family dinner, eyeing the cheap watch on my wrist as if it might contaminate the silverware. "What a fighter," she murmured another time, patting my hand as if soothing a stray dog. At first I thought I was imagining. I told myself she was just protective, just worried about her son. After all, wasn't that what mothers did? My friends weren't as forgiving. "You sure you know what you're getting into?" Mia, my oldest friend, asked me one night after too many glasses of boxed wine. "His family's different, Em. Not bad. Just, they'll always see you as an outsider." Even my mother, sweet, patient, unassuming, looked hesitant when she met Sylvia. But when I asked her afterward, she only smiled thinly and said, "If you're happy, honey, that's what matters." And I was happy. At least, I convinced myself I was. When Ethan proposed, it was at a candlelit rooftop party, surrounded by people with flawless teeth and expensive shoes. The diamond ring, too large, too heavy, felt foreign on my finger. But I smiled for the cameras anyway. It wasn't until weeks later, lying awake at night staring at the ceiling fan spinning endlessly above our bed, that I realized I hadn't heard myself really laugh, in months. But by then, I had already quit my job. Already enrolled in etiquette classes, Sylvia recommended. Already let my natural curls be straightened into the sleek, polished style she deemed more sophisticated. Already said goodbye to the chipped, paint-stained studio apartment where I had once dreamed of writing books that mattered, one small sacrifice at a time, one little death at a time. That's how it happens. Not all at once, but piece by piece, until you wake up one day and realize you can't even recognize your own reflection. Still, I told myself it was worth it. I clung to the idea that love was supposed to be hard, that compromise was noble, that fairy tales just looked different in real life. The wedding planning was a slow erosion of whatever scraps of independence I had left. Sylvia made the decisions. The country club venue, the 12-piece string quartet, the guest list filled, with people whose names I couldn't pronounce. Ethan smiled through it all, kissing my forehead and murmuring, "Just let her have this, babe. It's her dream, too." Her dream. Funny how no one asked what mine looked like. In the final week before the wedding, I sat alone in the guest room of Ethan's parents' mansion, my so-called bridal suite, staring at myself in the gilded mirror. The woman staring back at me wore a silk robe that cost more than 3 months' rent at my old apartment. Her eyes looked hollow. Her mouth was set in a careful, practiced smile. In my lap, my wedding shoes gleamed, delicate, white, and sharp-edged, like something meant to wound rather than carry. I remember running my thumb absently over the soles, wondering when exactly I had traded my calloused hands and messy dreams for polished nails and polite applause. I pressed my forehead to the cold window pane and whispered to the night, "Please, just let this be right. Let this be worth it." The night answered with silence. And so I walked down that aisle days later, wrapped in silk and trembling hope. Stepping into a life I thought would finally be mine, I see now how desperate I was. Not for money, not even for status. I was desperate for safety, for a future where I didn't have to be strong all the time, for someone to tell me it was okay to rest. But no prince had come to rescue me. I had only traded one kind of survival for another, one gilded in gold leaf and designer labels. Maybe love isn't blind after all. Maybe love just looks away. Until it's too late. Married life, as it turned out, was not the shimmering fairy tale I had once believed it would be. It was quieter, meaner, lonelier. It began, slowly like a hairline crack across a window pane, barely visible at first, easy to ignore if you didn't look too closely. Sylvia moved herself into our lives with the stealth of a seasoned invader, under the guise of helping us adjust to marriage. She picked the drapes, chose the nursery wallpaper before I could, even blink, even hired, and promptly fired, a nanny without consulting me. When Caleb was born, tiny and perfect with a cry like a wounded bird, I thought things might change. That maybe motherhood would anchor me back to myself. That maybe Sylvia would soften. But if anything, she tightened her grip. Every bottle I warmed, every lullaby I sang, every tear I soothed, Sylvia was there with a comment, a correction, a thin smile stretched too tight. "Oh, Emily," she'd sigh, plucking Caleb from my arms like I was a clumsy child. "Some people just aren't natural mothers." Each word burrowed under my skin, small and sharp as needles. Ethan, for his part, always looked vaguely uncomfortable, but never once defended me. "It's just her way," he'd say, shrugging as he disappeared into business trips and late-night meetings. The ring on my finger, once a symbol of promises, now felt like a manacle. I twisted it absent-mindedly during long, hollow evenings, alone with Caleb, the house too big, too silent around us. I tried in those early months to find small rebellions. I'd buy the cheaper baby formula, the one Sylvia disapproved of. I'd dress Caleb in soft cotton onesies from discount stores, instead of designer brands, tiny, insignificant acts of defiance that felt, for a moment, like reclaiming some sliver of myself. But guilt gnawed at me afterward. Guilt that wasn't mine, but had been carefully, meticulously placed there by hands that pretended to cradle while they crushed. It all came to a head the week of Sylvia's annual charity gala, the crowning jewel of her public image. The entire family was expected to perform, dress properly, smile graciously, pretend. The day before the event, Sylvia asked, me, no, told me, to help clean out her attic. Just a few boxes, she said airily. Nothing too taxing, dear. I should have refused. I should have made an excuse. But that old bone-deep instinct to comply, to keep the peace, kicked in before I could catch it. The attic was stifling. The late afternoon sun baked the roof tiles above, turning the air thick and heavy. Dust floated in lazy swirls around me as I waded through decades of forgotten things, broken furniture, outgrown toys, brittle photo albums. I found the lockbox buried under a moth-eaten quilt, half hidden like a secret someone had tried, but not too hard to forget. It was old, heavy, the latch stubborn. When it finally gave way, the smell of time and old paper hit me like a slap. Inside were letters, dozens of them. The handwriting varied, but the themes were eerily similar: desperation, money owed, broken promises. I sat, back on my heels, heart pounding. One letter, dated nearly 30 years ago, caught my eye. The paper was thin, translucent almost, as if the truth had bled through the years to find me. Sylvia, please, we had a deal. You promised to share. I have nowhere left to turn. Another. If you don't pay soon, people will start asking questions. You can't keep hiding behind that smile forever. A cold, clammy dread curled in my gut. Sylvia, the woman who built her reputation on charity work, on pristine family values, had a past thick with debts and broken agreements. I turned another letter over and saw a faded photograph slip. Out. Sylvia, younger but unmistakable, standing beside a man I didn't recognize, both of them laughing, glasses of champagne raised high. There was something reckless, almost feral, in her expression, a side of her the world wasn't supposed to see. As I stared, the floorboard behind me creaked. I whipped around, and there she was. Sylvia stood, framed in the attic doorway, backlit by the harsh afternoon light. Her mouth curled into a slow, knowing smile that didn't touch her eyes. Find something interesting, dear? Her voice was light. Too light. Like a violin string wound too tight, on the verge of snapping. My heart slammed against my ribs. The letters crumpled slightly in my sweating palms. For a moment, neither of us moved. The dust swirled between us, lazy and golden. I felt in that moment how precarious everything had been all along, how close to the edge I had been walking without even realizing it. I could have stammered an apology, could have dropped the box and backed away, pretending ignorance. Instead, I stood up slowly, tucking one of the letters into the pocket of my jeans without breaking her gaze. Her smile sharpened. Be careful poking around in things that don't concern you, Sylvia said, her voice low now, stripped of all pretense. Curiosity is a dangerous trait, especially for girls who don't know their place, girls like me. Girls who had climbed too high above their station, thinking love could buy them a seat at the table. I said nothing, just brushed the dust off my jeans and walked past her, the box left open like a wound. The smell of dust and old secrets clung to me as I descended the narrow attic stairs. Caleb's soft cries floated up from somewhere below, thin and plaintive. In my pocket, the letter crackled, a fragile, damning lifeline. Something inside me shifted then, a tectonic crack, small but irreversible. I was done being the girl who smiled and nodded. Done folding myself smaller and smaller just to fit into a world that was never built for me. As I stepped into the late afternoon sunlight, the gold band on my finger caught the light. It no longer looked like a symbol of love. It looked like what it had always been, a shackle. And for the first time in what felt like years, I allowed myself to feel it. The slow, seething bloom of rage, pure and clean and cold. I reached into my pocket, gripped the letter so tightly it tore along the crease, and whispered to the empty sky, "Not anymore." I didn't leave all at once. You never do, not really. First, it's the tiny things, the secrets you start keeping, the questions you stop asking, the small silent preparations you tuck away like folded letters under a mattress. I started siphoning money from the weekly household allowances Sylvia insisted on managing. $10 here, $20 there. Enough that it wouldn't be missed among the overflowing accounts and endless shopping sprees. I kept it in an old perfume box buried at the back of my closet. The same perfume Sylvia had once gifted me with a smirk, saying it was more appropriate than the cheap floral scent I used to wear. I stopped wearing that perfume the night she mocked me at the wedding, and now the box held my escape. I found the apartment through a handwritten ad taped to a bus stop. 1 bedroom, no credit checks. Cash only. It sat like a crumbling tooth at the edge of town, where the sidewalks cracked and stray cats haunted the stoops. The paint peeled from the front door. The heater rattled like it was coughing up its last breath. But the landlord didn't ask questions. And when I stood inside that grim little space for the first time, the keys biting into my palm, I felt something strange flicker inside me. Freedom. Real freedom wasn't shiny. It wasn't a luxury penthouse or a diamond ring. It was peeling wallpaper and windows that stuck in their frames. It was air that tasted like dust and possibility. I set a date. The night of Sylvia's annual winter gala, the one event Ethan and his mother never missed, no matter what storms raged at home. I told them Caleb had a cold. They barely glanced at me. And so, while they clinked champagne glasses under chandeliers and posed for glossy magazine spreads, I packed. I didn't take much. A duffel bag of clothes, Caleb's favorite threadbare stuffed bear, my worn journal, its pages still mostly blank but waiting. The old letters I had taken from Sylvia's attic, my insurance, my armor. I left the wedding ring on the nightstand, glinting under the harsh bedroom light like a dropped coin no one would bother to pick up. Caleb slept fitfully in my arms as I carried him to the beat-up Honda I had bought with the cash from my side gigs, online tutoring, editing resumes, selling old books. His tiny head pressed into my shoulder, trusting me completely. The responsibility of that trust was a weight and a lifeline all at once. The drive across town felt endless. Each red light, each stop sign, I half expected flashing lights behind me, a hand on my shoulder, someone dragging me back. But no one came. No one even noticed. The apartment was freezing. The heater wheezed but offered no real warmth. I bundled Caleb in layers of blankets, sat with him on the stained carpet until he drifted into uneasy sleep. Then I stood in the middle of the kitchen, if you could call it that. A narrow strip of linoleum, a sink that dripped constantly, a crooked shelf lined with mismatched dishes. I found an old tin kettle and boiled water on the ancient stove, poured it into a chipped mug with a packet of dollar store instant coffee. The first sip burned my tongue. Bitter. Thin. But it was mine. Leaned barefoot against the counter, the floor cold against my soles, and stared out the tiny window at the cracked parking lot and the flickering streetlight beyond. My life had shrunk down to the essentials: a child, a mug of coffee, a patch of space no one could take from me. It wasn't much. It was everything. Caleb cried out in his sleep, a soft, wounded sound, and I padded back into the makeshift bedroom to soothe him. I curled around him on the sagging mattress, breathing in the baby powder scent of his hair, feeling the tiny thud of his heartbeat against mine. I pressed my forehead to his and whispered, "We're okay. We're okay." Whether I was trying to comfort him or myself, I didn't know. The days that followed blurred into a gritty rhythm. Mornings at the bookstore, a battered independent place run by a woman named Marcy, who paid under the table and turned a blind eye to Caleb, napping behind the counter in his playpen. Evenings piecing together freelance editing jobs on a battered secondhand laptop. Nights soothing Caleb through the confusion and tears, pretending I wasn't terrified half the time. The apartment was too cold. The plumbing was unreliable. Roaches sometimes scurried along the baseboards if I turned the lights on too fast. But no one mocked me here. No one told me I wasn't enough. No one decided my life for me. The first time I laughed, really laughed, it startled me. It was over something stupid. Caleb trying to put his socks on his hands and marching around the living room like a tiny emperor. I laughed until tears blurred my vision, until Caleb joined in, giggling uncontrollably without knowing why. That night, after I tucked him in, I opened my journal for the first time in years. The pen felt awkward in my hand at first, like greeting an old friend after too long apart. But the words came, not perfect, not polished. Real. I wrote about the silence of the apartment, the smell of old coffee, the way the streetlight outside cast long, trembling shadows across the floor at night. I wrote about Sylvia, about Ethan, about the girl I used to be, and the woman I was trying to become. I wrote myself back into existence. Some nights were harder than others. Nights when the loneliness gnawed so deep I thought it might hollow me out completely. Nights when Caleb's cries pierced the thin walls and the neighbors banged on the ceiling in irritation. Nights when I held the old, crumpled letters in my hands and reminded myself there was still a reckoning coming. But mostly, I survived. One breath, one heartbeat, one stubborn, defiant step at a time. And slowly, the fear began to thin. Not vanish. Not yet. But thin, like mist burned away by the morning sun. That night, standing barefoot in the kitchen, the cracked mug of cheap coffee warm between my palms, I whispered it aloud. This is not the end. I closed my eyes, breathed in the steam rising from the cup, the scent sharp and earthy. This is the beginning. It started, like most of the important things in my life, with something small, something easy to overlook. A second cup of burnt coffee on the bookstore counter, a quiet nod after a long shift, a kindness offered without expectation. Linda wasn't someone you noticed immediately. She had a way of blending into spaces, a soft cardigan, sensible shoes, hair clipped back with a no-nonsense barrette. But her eyes were sharp as broken glass, and kinder than any I'd ever known. She started as a customer, thumbing through dusty accounting textbooks and old finance magazines. One day, she stayed past closing, helping me lift a broken shelf without being asked. Another day, she slipped Caleb a butterscotch candy from her pocket when he started to cry. In a world where so much had been torn from me, Linda felt safe. We talked between customers, swapping stories of lost dreams and stubborn survival. I learned she was a retired accountant, sharp with numbers, sharper with people. She learned enough to know I was a woman living on the jagged edge of something, still too raw to put into words. One rainy afternoon, when the store was empty and Caleb was asleep in the playpen behind the counter, she asked, "Ever think about fighting back?" Blinked at her, heart thudding against my ribs. Her voice was low, almost casual, but her eyes, those sharp, kind eyes, didn't waver. I hesitated. Then slowly, I pulled the old lockbox letters from under the counter. I hadn't looked at them since the night I escaped. Had been too busy surviving to think about anything beyond the next paycheck. The next meal, the next moment. Linda spread them out carefully, hand steady, her brow furrowed. Her mouth tightened into a grim line. "You know what this is?" she asked, tapping one yellowed envelope with a chipped nail. I shook my head, feeling small. Stupid. This, she said, isn't just scandal. It's fraud. Serious fraud. If half of this ties back to active business assets, you've got leverage, maybe more. The world tilted slightly around me. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. Leverage. It wasn't just a word. It was a door. One I hadn't dared believe I could open. Linda leaned in, lowering her voice. How much more do you have? I told her about the attic, about the lockbox, about Sylvia's smile in the doorway, sharp and knowing. Linda nodded slowly, as if weighing invisible scales. You're sitting on a gold mine, she said. But you need proof, real proof, bank records, emails, paper trails. Proof. The word felt heavy in my mouth, weighty. Solid. Proof could not be gaslit. Proof could not be mocked away at dinner parties or smothered under silk smiles. Proof was a weapon. Over the next few weeks, Linda taught me things, practical things, survival things. How to trace ownership through shell companies. How to recognize creative accounting buried in public records. How to read between the lines of financial documents, the way other people read novels. Knowledge was a new kind of oxygen. Every night after Caleb fell asleep, I would pore over old records by lamplight, highlighter in one hand, heart pounding in my chest. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. Network of fraudulent charity funds, administrative expenses funneled into personal accounts, property bought and sold through shadowy middlemen. Sylvia's perfect world was built on stolen foundations. And Ethan's name, my husband's name, was splattered across more than a few of those transactions. I started a binder, cheap, battered, bursting at the seams. Each document, each printout, each handwritten note layered carefully inside, a map charting the architecture of their lies. It felt intoxicating. Not like revenge exactly. Not yet. More like reclaiming something that had been stolen. My voice. My truth. My power. One Saturday morning, while I was hunched over the kitchen table with my binder, Caleb clambered into my lap. "What you doin', Mommy?" he asked, tugging at the pages. "Just work, baby," I said, ruffling his hair. He grinned, a flash of mischief, and said, "Grandma had a hiding place too." I froze. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" He shrugged, utterly innocent. "She showed me, said it was our little secret." He made a zipping motion across his lips, giggling. My stomach twisted into a knot. What kind of hiding place? Caleb thought hard, his brow furrowed in that way he did when trying to remember a cartoon plot. "In her big closet," he said finally. "Behind. The coats. Lots of envelopes and papers. She said grown-ups would be mad if they found it." My heart thudded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. More documents. More proof. The past wasn't just hidden in yellowed letters and fading memories. It was still alive, still tucked into the bones of their polished world, still vulnerable. Hugged Caleb tightly, breathing in his warm, sleepy scent. He squirmed but didn't pull away. That night, after he drifted into dreams, I sat by the cracked window with the binder in my lap. Outside, the world was draped in silver mist, the streetlight flickering like a heartbeat. I thought about everything that had been taken from me, about the girl who had once believed love could fix anything, about the woman who had learned, with blood and tears and grit, that some things must be burned down before they can be rebuilt. I thought about Sylvia, her smile, her lies, her brittle empire, and I realized I didn't want to destroy her because of the humiliation she had rained down on me. I wanted to destroy her because she believed she was untouchable, because she thought people like me, girls from nowhere. Girls without pedigree or power were born to be stepping stones beneath her feet. Not anymore. Not ever again. The lawyer's office sat like a fortress of glass and steel at the edge of downtown, all sharp angles and cold reflections. Stood outside in the biting evening air, the folder of evidence pressed against my chest so tightly the edges dug into my ribs. My palms were sweaty, my knees a little shaky, but I didn't hesitate. Inside, the receptionist barely glanced up as I gave my name. The conference room they led me to was cold, sterile, the overhead lights buzzing faintly. I set the folder down on the polished table. Watched it sit there, small, battered, unimpressive. And yet, it held the weight of 1,000 unspoken words, 1,000 broken promises. It was more powerful than any apology Ethan could ever stammer out, more damning than any backhanded compliment Sylvia could ever mutter. It was truth, solid, undeniable. Lawyer, a woman with silver hair and sharp eyes, opened the folder, flipped through the pages, and whistled low under her breath. "Well," she said, glancing up at me, "looks like you've got yourself a case." I didn't smile. Not yet. Instead, I sat back, hands steady now, heart pounding like a drumbeat of war inside my chest. This wasn't the end. This wasn't even revenge. This was reclamation. This was survival, sharpened into something beautiful and dangerous. This was the beginning of the end for them, and the beginning of everything for me. The hall was almost unbearably bright, rows of white folding chairs stretched out like teeth. Tables lined in pristine linens, glasses polished to blinding gleams, bouquets of overfed roses perched in crystal vases. Perfect, orderly, a stage at the front, framed with a giant shimmering banner, honoring Sylvia Harrington, a lifetime of generosity. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't made my stomach churn. I smoothed the hem of my secondhand dress, navy blue, simple, unremarkable, and tugged Caleb's small hand into mine. He clutched his juice box, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. We were early, on purpose. I spotted Sylvia across the room, holding court at a table near the front, her laugh floating high and brittle over the clatter of silverware. She wore a cream dress that shimmered under the chandeliers, pearls tight against her throat, hair swept into a severe, gleaming bun. She looked invincible, unassailable. She always had until today. I walked toward her slowly, heart hammering against my ribs, my folder clutched like a blade beneath the folds of my coat. Sylvia noticed me when I was 3 feet away, her mouth tightening just slightly, just enough for me to see the tremor behind the mask. "Emily," she said, voice honeyed and sharp, all at once. How unexpected. I smiled politely, set the folder down in front of her with a soft, deliberate thud on the pristine white tablecloth. Her hand, the one still adorned with diamond rings like tiny weapons, froze midway to her. Champagne flute. I leaned in, keeping my voice low. "I don't want a scene, Sylvia, but if you force me, I won't hesitate." She gave a breathy little laugh, but it cracked at the edges. "Don't be ridiculous," she hissed. "You think anyone would believe this?" I tapped the folder, lightly. Inside, letters, bank statements, property deeds, emails, proof so solid even the best PR team in the world couldn't spin it into a misunderstanding. I watched her face shift, disbelief, outrage, calculation. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice shaking but steady enough. "You're going to accept your award. Smile for the cameras. Pretend everything's perfect." I leaned closer, so close I could see the faint smear of lipstick feathering at the corner of her mouth. "And then," I whispered, "you're going to quietly step away From me, from Caleb, from anything that touches our lives. Her nostrils flared. And if I don't? I smiled. I've already sent copies to the IRS, the State Attorney General's office, and I let the last word hang, heavy and deliberate. A reporter. Sylvia paled under the artful sweep of her foundation. For a moment, just a flicker, she looked exactly as small as she truly was. A woman whose empire was built on sand, on lies whispered in the dark. "You think anyone will care?" she spat under her breath. "People forget. People forgive." I tilted my head, studying her the way one might study a dying animal. "Maybe," I said softly. "But they'll never forget Caleb's face when your empire crumbles. They'll never forget the children you stole from, the families you destroyed." Her mouth snapped shut. I straightened, picked up Caleb's hand again, and turned away. Let her sit there, stewing in her fear, as the walls of her kingdom began to shudder. The ceremony started 15 minutes later. Sylvia took the stage, still, flawless, still smiling. But there was a tightness now, a stiffness to her movements I recognized too well. I stood in the back with Caleb, our chairs tucked neatly against the last row. I didn't need the spotlight anymore. I didn't need applause. I had something better now. Freedom. The MC's voice droned on, listing Sylvia's many fabricated accomplishments. Guests clapped politely. Cameras flashed. It was all so achingly familiar. The same script, the same performance. Until a man in a rumpled jacket pushed his way toward the stage. A reporter. He carried a sealed manila envelope. I watched, pulse steady, as he handed it to Sylvia, in full view of the crowd. Confused murmurs rippled through the room. Sylvia opened it with shaking hands, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and paled. On that paper, a summary of decades of fraud, annotated with photos, transaction records, shell companies, proof, cold, unforgiving, public. The microphone caught the sound of the envelope slipping from her fingers, the crinkle of paper hitting polished wood. The silence that followed was volcanic. Ethan scrambled onto the stage, grabbing at Sylvia's arm, hissing frantic whispers into her ear. But it was too late. Reporters moved closer, cameras flashing wildly. Guests stood, chairs screeching against marble floors, faces twisted in horror, in hungry fascination. The perfect facade crumbled, right there under the chandeliers. And Sylvia, my mother-in-law, my tormentor, stood revealed for what she truly was. A liar, a thief, a queen whose crown had rotted from the inside out. I didn't stay to watch the full collapse. I didn't need to. Some things you don't need to witness to believe. I led Caleb out into the cool night, his small hand tight in mine. Behind us, chaos roared. But ahead was only quiet. Clean, open air. Sky stretched wide and endless above us. We climbed into the battered Honda, the same car that had carried us away once before, and drove home, our real home. It was late when we got back to the little apartment. The heater rattled to life as we stepped inside, filling the space with its thin, stubborn warmth. Caleb tumbled sleepily into bed without protest. I tucked the worn quilt up around his chin, kissed his forehead, lingered just a moment longer to watch the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest. In the kitchen, I found the jar of wildflower seeds tucked behind the coffee tins, a gift from Linda. "New beginnings," she had said simply, pressing them into my hand. I stepped barefoot out onto the tiny patch of dirt behind the building. The soil was cold, crumbly between my fingers. I planted the seeds one by one, careful and deliberate, breathing, Out all the old pain with each handful of earth. Above me, the stars blinked like watchful eyes. Silent witnesses. The air smelled of damp earth and cheap coffee, and something sweeter, something new, something like hope. I sat back on my heels, brushing the dirt from my hands. Behind me, the apartment glowed soft and golden through the kitchen window. Home, not perfect, not polished. Real, mine. I pressed my hand lightly over my heart, feeling the slow, steady beat beneath my ribs. Not desperate anymore, not broken. Whole. Caleb stirred inside, calling for me in his sleep. I smiled, brushing a smudge of dirt from my cheek, and whispered to the stars. We're okay. I turned back, toward the light, toward my son, toward the life we were building with our own hands. One seed at a time,